All right, psychology nerds, and welcome back to another episode of Psychology and Stuff, the podcast from Good Cause Productions at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. I'm your host, Alison Jane Martingano, and today we're going to be talking about the psychology of the home, how we shape the place we live in, and how it shapes us. I'm thrilled to be joined today by someone who's been working on these questions for a long time, Psychology and Stuff previous co-host and UWGB psychology professor, Dr. Georjeanna Wilson-Doenges. She received her PhD in social ecology from the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Wilson-Doenges' field is environmental psychology, which explores how the built and natural environment impact human behavior, and she enjoys applying the many benefits of nature to people's everyday lives. She is the author of textbook SPSS Research Methods and has taught statistics, research methods, and environmental psychology for the past 30 years, both in person and online. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Georjeanna. How are you doing today?
I am excellent.
I'm really excited that I finally get to talk to you about something that you're super passionate in. I think I've dragged you into talk on podcasts before about things that are not your main topic.
This is true. So I am really excited to talk about what we're talking about today. So I'm going to let you sort of introduce what we're talking about today.
So, as you know, we're going to be talking about the psychology of the home environment. And this whole podcast was prompted by me reading a special issue in the Journal of Environmental Psychology on the home. And I thought, hey, I know somebody who does environmental psych. But as you have told me very recently, you were actually trained as a social ecologist. Am I getting that right?
That is correct.
All right. So I'm going to have to ask you to explain what on earth that is and how that is a slightly different perspective on the home environment.
For sure. This whole special issue, even though it's in the Journal of Environmental Psychology, is based in social ecology, which is looking at the person, the human, in the context of the home in a transactional way, which means how does the person herself impact the environment, and then how does that environment impact the person? And so I kind of think about it like we start in the micro and look at the person in their room, in their house, and then take it out to the macro, like their street, their neighborhood, their city, and then you can go really wide out to their country, the world, the cultural context, and things like that. And then you zoom back in that these things are on a continuum. And often, as psychologists, we just study one of those things at a time. I want to study how stress impacts child development. But a social ecologist would say, well, you can't just look at stress in the absence of what kind of home are they living in? How many siblings do they have? What's the physical environment like? What's the social environment like? And what's the psychological environment like in that home? But also, the home is not a box. It has transparent walls in one sense, so that we are being impacted by forces outside of that boundary, and we are impacting forces outside of that boundary. And so social ecology really looks at a larger context of how things are happening. So it makes it so fun. I always used to tease my advisor, who's one of the authors, Dan Stokel's, when I was doing my PhD back in the 90s at UC Irvine, which was the first school of social ecology. And so I have a PhD in social ecology. I always teased him that we always had to look at the kitchen sink. We could never just look at a single dish. And for some part of it, I really wanted to just look at one thing. And he's like, no, it's so much more complicated than that. And so social ecology research is really fascinating to me because it gets to look at the whole context.
Yeah, well, I'm just sitting here like, that's got to be hard, right? In psychology, I do tend to try and look at just one thing at a time, maybe two.
Yep.
And you were telling me that social ecologists look at everything at every level simultaneously?
Yes.
All right. So follow-up question, how do they do that?
Yes. It's a sort of an amalgamation of, you can use census data to get an idea about at the neighborhood or block level, some demographics like income or typical job status or number of families, married couples, single persons, elders living in that community. So we can get some community level information. Also, that what goes along with that is the physical environment. So a researcher who is a social ecologist might count number of trees on the streets in a neighborhood when they're looking at something like child play. And one of the articles in this special issue actually delves into how having nature in your neighborhood encourages socialization and physical exercise, which then correlates with mental well-being. And so something as cool as that you wouldn't even think about, like how close are you to the nearest green space in like kilometers or meters or whatever, is one of the things that we study all the time. So I did a study here in Green Bay locally looking at front porches in houses in the downtown Green Bay area. And I literally drove around in my car and counted trees and counted porches and how much furniture was on each porch as a way to understand how do the people inside that house who I haven't talked to, how might they relate to their neighbors by the kind of furniture and the kind of boundary crossing that their home has with the neighborhood, and what sort of social environment is created. Is there a town square? Is there a little garden? Is there a play set or something for children? Is there a skate park? Like any of these things could create opportunities for good mental well-being.
Yeah. And as you're telling me about driving around looking at the porches, little creepy, by the way, just a tad, that surely this must also change based on sort of the time of year, especially here in Green Bay. Like, we are recording this just after the blizzard came through. And so presumably the way that we interact with our immediate environment and the larger community does it like change over the course of the year and then come back again?
Yes, it really does. But the blizzard is a great example of some sort of like global phenomenon. Like I think across the planet, we've been dealing with extreme weather events. And I think it's an interesting, I know this is not what you meant, but I think it's such an interesting thing to see how people respond in such a crisis as a blizzard. And I've heard so many stories of neighbors helping neighbors, like snow below their driveway and help them shovel out. And the ways in which people interact outside of their homes, even in terrible weather, can say something about the mental health of the people inside those houses if they're willing to cross that boundary and go outside, even in a blizzard, and help their neighbors.
That's such a good, it wasn't what I was getting at, but I love that you twisted it because, I was thinking, we all hunker down and we don't go out, we don't talk to anybody in the winter. But no, you're right. That's a perfect example of when we do that, when we recognize that an event is affecting multiple people in our community.
Yes. And I think that one of the articles talks about how the world level crises have been crossing the boundary of our individual homes. And I think the blizzard is a great example of that. Just the amount of climate change that's happening across our planet, thinking about the floods in Hawaii and seeing how people are coming together is something that a social ecologist would really love to study, that context of people inside their homes not hunkering down. And there's also the thought about people losing their homes in some of these, like the fires or floods and things like that, and how you help people rebuild a home in a neighborhood and reestablish the connections that they may already have had, or if they didn't have it. It's such a great opportunity to use planning to build houses that do connect people. And it's a great opportunity to really double down on well-being outside of the home, because you can make the inside of a home look beautiful, but if that person never goes outside, it's going to impact them. Like the loneliness crisis can be averted with great design of neighborhoods and homes to allow people to connect, cross that boundary out into the larger ecology of their neighborhood.
Yeah, I hear this as, I will get us back to our planned topics to talk about in a moment. But I hear this a lot when people like me emigrate from Europe to America, that everything here seems so much more spread out, right?
Yes.
The distance between one house and the next is just greater, which in some ways is lovely. You have all these big front yards and all this grass, and it seems really nice. But you do, I feel, bump less into your neighbors as you do when all the houses are right next to each other.
Yes, yes. And I feel like also we as Americans tend to invest a lot of money in our backyard and not our front yard or front porch. And that the ways in which we build our homes faces backwards.
That's true.
And it really does erode the sense of community that is so important, and what a lot of these articles touch on, that we can't just think about beautiful physical spaces. We also have to think about that these physical spaces are social spaces and they're psychological spaces, and that we need to consider how we're building in order to promote well-being. And I think that that's the greatest gift of social ecology, and studying people in this kitchen sink of contexts is that it allows us to make some good decisions about which home we choose to live in, what neighborhood we choose to live in, and if we have the opportunity, how do we improve that?
Oh, awesome. I'm thinking as you're talking, so I only recently bought my first home with my husband, and in our neighborhood, people do have backyards, but there's also, I think, every house, or almost every house, does have an open front porch. And a lot of our neighbors will sit out, well, when it was slightly warmer, would sit out on their porch, and ours is the only porch that has no furniture. And when my dad came to stay just recently, he actually purchased me a rocking chair so that I could become one of these people that sits out on my front porch and take part in that community as well.
I tell your dad thank you, that he has actually not only improved the well-being of your neighborhood, but you as well.
Duh.
Like, it is a transaction, right? Like, it's you impacting your neighborhood, but your neighborhood's going to give that back to you, as well. And so I think that's the power of thinking about home not as a box.
Yeah. No, I love that. Now I can tell Dad that was an extra great present. All right. Well, we're going to focus some more on me now, because I'm going to shift the conversation to talk about childhood. And I actually had the joy of growing up in one home. My family did not move, and there's this one very clear image of what my childhood home was. And actually, whenever I dream about home, I always dream about that home. I haven't lived there for decades, but that's like my, obviously, mental image of home. And I wanted to talk about the importance of home in childhood. So a lot of the articles in this special issue did focus on sort of how our home environment shapes our development for good and for bad.
Yes.
One of the ones that sounded negative to me was this idea of chaos being problematic in the home. I wonder if you could talk about that a little more.
Sure. So a few of these articles really did focus on the home as a developmental system, and that the home is where we learn self-regulation, and that when you think about a person in the context of their home, it's not just one child. Typically, it's a child and maybe a parent, or maybe more than one parent, or maybe a sibling, and maybe more than one sibling. It's an ecological system. And the research shows that previous research, old research, used to say that low SES communities put kids at risk for developmental stressors. And what one of the articles by Evans and Kim said was that it's not that, particularly, it's not the SES, it's chaos in the home, particularly if a kid is vulnerable to lack of self-regulation, that a home that is not structured and living with others who are not self-regulated and there not being routines in a house, and also no opportunity for play are like a petri dish of ecology in the home that actually is the most detrimental to well-being, but also to learning. And so one of the articles was talking about learning at home during the pandemic and how it wasn't necessarily low SES children that were seeing declines in learning, but children who were living in homes that were chaotic, that had no structure and had no routine and didn't have the kind of support system to learn in, didn't learn a thing for a whole year, and how far that put them back.
Yeah. And so when we're talking about chaos, I want to be clear about what we mean by that. So we don't just necessarily mean like mess, right?
No.
We it's not about having a tidy or an untidy house, right?
Correct.
It's about as you mentioned, like routine. So this is the place where we eat.
Yes.
And that is where we go after we eat, like, and having like this routine around the physical space. Am I getting that right?
Yes. It's not only the physical space, though, it's also the social interactions that happen there and the psychological interactions that happen. And so the physical space is part of it. And a messy house can sometimes be a symptom of a messy social structure. Because part of routines is that you all as a family pitch in to do chores, for example, and setting up a self-regulation where I have to do my chores first before I play. Or after I'm done playing, I pick up my toys and I put them back. If those routines are absent, what will show if you walked into that home would be a mess, but it is a larger symptom of the social degradation that's happening in that home as well.
Yeah, and so it's not that the mess itself is the problem, it's the lack of sort of structure. And I love that you say chores are a good thing. I'm sure there are lots of parents listening now that are happy you just said that. Because, but they build that structure and that self-regulation, and they model it for others. And I think, having been a child myself, that when our parents show that they do their chores, right, they do their contribution and model that structure and regulation, then it's easier for the children to pick up on.
Absolutely. And I think during the pandemic especially, like the adults in many families were also working from home, and the kids' job was doing schoolwork, and the adults in the house were working their jobs, and it was stressful. Like, it's a very stressful because it was a sudden change and it was forced upon us. But I think that the families that were most successful at learning and at working created an environment that was adaptable, that created an environment that was flexible enough to meet the needs of their family, whoever that might be in that environment, and create a new structure. And a lot of people don't have that cognitive flexibility to change up the game when you're in it.
Right. We talk about the importance of, structure and habit and routine, but you're also mentioning the importance of changing those structures, habits, and routines when we need to.
Yes.
To be more effective ones.
Absolutely. And I think one of the articles was talking about you can build really nice houses, but if they don't meet the needs of the people in it, then they won't use the space properly. And so I think about, building a really structured, formal home office where you shut a door may not have been useful when you also have kids at home during a pandemic that you also have to keep an eye on. Or, like it's also your dining room table, which is where I worked during the pandemic and now continue to work. I set up a little office in my dining room. And I think about the ways in which we need to be flexible in the physical environment as well as in our habits and our routines. And that allows us to be successful.
Yeah. I'm thinking about one of the articles, and I hope I don't summarize this wrong, about playrooms or
Yes.
designated playrooms that don't get used. I think for exactly this reason you're saying
Yes.
is that people think, oh, here's going to be this beautiful playroom, and it doesn't work. And we were actually talking to our colleague, Jason Cowell, earlier today that said he did almost exactly the same thing with his daughter, created this beautiful play space that then didn't get used. So why is that?
I think it's because it's the age-old problem of a designer is not the user. And it's much better to let things evolve naturally and build around that concept. It's sort of like the concept of there's a parking lot outside of our building here on campus, and the parking lot goes through a field. And before you got here, I used to tromp through that field, and I was not the only one. And we would make a path by tromping down plants. And eventually, they built a gravel path.
I love that gravel path.
I know. And it's so that's a great example. They had built a meandering path through that field that would take me 3 times as long to walk to get to my car. And no one ever took that path. And now that they built the path that we made, no one uses that other path. It's the same thing with a formal playroom. The formal playroom is the meandering path that doesn't really suit anybody's needs, because I don't want to be outside in winter any longer than I have to be, like tromping through a field. And so if we can build meaningful places that understand who's using it, when they're using it, with whom, do they need to be watched? And so another one of our colleagues was talking about how her daughter's playthings are in her office, which is actually her dining room. And I love that story, that adaptability, that flexibility of an ecology of a home, that you understand that she's too young to play by herself for a long time. And so if she's in the same room where you're doing your work, you can pay attention to her. She can play naturally, and it doesn't have to be a fight. Like, oh, will you come up and play with me in the playroom?
I'm starting to think now, since we have been sort of buying furniture for our home in the last few months, is that maybe the smart choice is to live in a space for a little while before deciding to fork out on the expensive piece of furniture. And then maybe when you do fork out, to buy a piece that could be moved, because it's not necessarily going to sit in that one spot for your entire life.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And I love the sectional couches where you can reorganize it, like to be an L shape this way or that way. That gives you the flexibility if it's actually mobile. And one of the things that one of the articles talks about is you can make flexible environments, but if nobody knows how to move it or flex it, doesn't have any ideas, it will just stay that way, but be subpar. And I think about our classrooms that we built in 2001 in our building to have tables and chairs that were movable. And it was a really big deal to be able to move those tables and chairs so that you could work in groups and then move them back and be in lecture. I have never once in the last, 24 years, moved a table or chair in that classroom.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that was not a success and probably
No,
very expensive in the process.
exactly. So if you're going to make things flexible, make sure that people know how to flex them.
Yeah, no, that's fair. We also have one of those sectional couches that is technically movable, but the heaving required to move it, it did mean that it moved from one house to another and it was able to be reshaped. So that's good, I suppose. But actually changing it on day to day would never happen. It's far too heavy for that kind of a flex.
Exactly. And so, like, thinking about that a house is more than a couch and a chair and a table and a box around you, but it is a social ecosystem and that's supported by the physical environment. And we need to like make sure that the physical environment supports whatever social environment is happening there and not to separate them from each other.
I love that. I love that. And I think about how, and it's all credit to you, really. In the psychology department, we now have a puzzle space, which has turned also into our socializing space. And it works really well because you can add more chairs or remove chairs as you need to this space. And so it
Yes.
can increase and reduce and expand as it's needed.
Absolutely. And we replaced the living room, like coffee table that was there with an actual puzzle table because we found that that table was too small. And so we like literally flexed that environment to meet our needs. And I love that. And that may have been my thought all along.
I keep talking about flexing. We talked about children and the importance of the home for their development, but what about as we're aging and we're getting older? We presumably want to keep making changes to our home, and I'm thinking of some of the biggest changes you might have to make, like making an adaptable bathroom space or rails or a chair, chair up the stairs.
Yep.
And how do these happen and affect our psychology as we have to make those changes?
It's really a very interesting article, and they talk a lot about place identity. And this makes a big assumption that people might be living in a house for a very long time as they age. And thinking about back changing an environment that you've lived in for 40 years to be designed for you who may have now some accessibility issues is really a challenging affront to who you think you are in that place.
So you've got this idea of yourself, and it's pretty concrete, and it's been around for a while now, and you're settled into it. And then all of a sudden, you've got to update your whole view of everything.
Yes, and that you have to admit that you can't use what we call the affordances of that house, like having a bedrooms on the second floor, is something really great if you have teenagers that need their privacy and they want to go upstairs and shut the door. But when you're an elder or an elderly couple and you can no longer go up and down the stairs, that's like a heavy load on top of you. Like just crushing you, like saying you're not able to live in this place that you think is part of you, part of your identity. And so that is a very challenging thing that I think we tend to look at that as psychologically helpful, like to our elders. Like, oh, when my dad had a stroke and he couldn't walk, we put a ramp up to our house. And we thought we were doing him such a favor. Like, now you can access the home and it's going to be great. And he just saw it as a defeat. Like, he wasn't able to walk upstairs. Like, and so it's, I think we need to think about, again, the social interactions that we have and the psychological ecosystem that we're living in. And people really do develop a place identity with home. It's our most important environment. So I think what we should be thinking about is when we're building houses that we universally design them from the start. So that I don't have to, when I age in my home, think now I can't go up the stairs. Maybe I have that chair thing installed from the start, or maybe there's 0 stairs to get in and out of the first floor, and we put the master bedroom on that first floor. And that's very common today, but it wasn't very common 30 years ago. And so we've made a lot of strides in that universal design where you design for everyone to be able to access your house. So if you make your hallways wider for wheelchair accessibility from the start, then you develop a place identity with a place that can grow with you. And that's true flexibility as opposed to adaptability.
I'm just letting that digest for a moment and thinking about the house we just bought. That is not flexible in that manner.
Yes.
And I suppose that's why people, I mean, this is, of course, as you said, big assumption you're living in the same house
Right.
for a long time. And obviously a lot of people move.
Yes.
And one of the reasons people move is because they find their space is not flexible or adaptable, right?
Yes. Yes.
Needing a new space.
Yes. But when I think about that, I think, what else are you losing? It's not just you're moving to another house. You're moving to another ecosystem. And you have a new street and new neighbors and new community and all new things. And so building a really nice house is okay. I mean, it's nice to have a nice house, but you also have to imagine grieving the loss of not just a home that you identify with, but a whole entire ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely feel that as someone who's moved around a lot.
Yes.
And the having to rebuild, like you say, it's those different levels, but the further you move, the more levels you're going to have to rebuild. If you're moving to just a different house on the street, maybe that's only one level, right? But if you're moving to a different state or different country,
Right.
all of those levels need rebuilding simultaneously.
Absolutely. And then I just go back to what we were talking about at the beginning about housing design. And can we have available housing for our elders that faces forward so that if they can't walk around the block, but they can walk out to a 0-grade porch and sit out there, that gives them the serendipity to run into me while I'm going to the mailbox and say hi and create that social cohesion that I think that people struggle with, especially our elders when they are no longer as mobile, especially when it's icy and like terrible out, like thinking about how we can connect people in our neighborhoods is really important to me.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a soundbite for one of our clips for social media for sure. All right, we've touched on it a little here and there, but I want to talk about the effect of the COVID pandemic on the way that we treated our homes and then how that affected our psychology afterwards. So obviously a lot of us ended up working from home,
Yes.
a space that we probably did not work from before that at all, really. So how did that mindset changes? And the research in this special issue spoke to this in a couple of ways. I wonder if you could tell us what they found.
Definitely. I think one of the things that they talked about is that we are currently in what they call the age of precarity, that global big events like a pandemic or climate change impacts us all the way down to the home level. And the pandemic is a great example of how our homes have become a front line to global issues. And that's something that's very different. And I think it's because of, our phones and social media and computers. Like, we have access to the globe sitting on our couch. And that brings large issues right to the heart of where we are developing and where we are living. So the home during the COVID pandemic was not just a place where we sleep and eat. It then became a place where we work and where we learn and where we play, because you can't even play like with other people. Like you can't go out and have drinks. You can't have a play date with other kids. It also became a place where we needed to rest from the stress of doom scrolling, which wasn't even a word before 2020, right? Like that wasn't even a thing.
My dad said that for the first time the other day. I didn't even know he knew the word. It was a shocking moment. He's like, I'm doom scrolling. Except I think he said dread scrolling, which wasn't right.
We'll forgive him. But it just highlights how incredibly important the home environment is, and it's becoming more and more important. And that ecosystem is connected far beyond the walls of your house, but it is also important what happens inside those walls of that house. And so we talked previously about like child development and how structure and the social relationship that you have within your home can definitely impact that. But it's also the relationships you have outside of your home. But when that's taken away, that just exacerbates negative inside the home environments, particularly for kids who might have already been at risk, like sensitive to deregulation. They were particularly impacted because it all came down to that. But some of us came out of the pandemic, and we were talking earlier about this, like we have grown an affinity to working from home now, and that it seems like such a privilege.
Yes, I mean, people campaign to be able to work from home, right? This is something that's very desired.
And I feel like that's such a change from a mere 6 years ago, where we all hated working from home and couldn't wait to go back to the office. But that really changed during the pandemic because I think we rooted in to our homes in a way that helped us create a work identity at home. And we were talking about like I created a little office for myself at my dining room table, and I put my knickknacks up and my artwork like behind me for my Zoom background. And I have everything that I need right there in my little home office, which used to be just a dining room. And how I've become very attached to that place. And it's an expression of who I am. And I love working from home.
Right, because you now have a place that's like fully for it, right? You're not bricking up your laptop and trying to make some space for it on the counter, but we were forced to create this new space, flexible space,
Yes.
Adapting. So yeah, I was telling you earlier, I put up wallpaper next to my desk, so I have a cute little study work area. But I'm guessing that there are probably people that didn't do that,
Yes.
right? And so those people didn't make that new space in their home.
Yes.
And so for those folks, they probably still prefer coming into the office, right? Or they didn't have to make that adjustment.
Yes, and I think that is like correlated with chaos, right? When you live in a chaotic home where there aren't structured routines and you don't do specific behaviors in specific places, then it's very hard to adapt that to a new routine that you do if you didn't have one to begin with. And so I one of the articles called out how struggling children didn't learn anything because they had no physical support for that social learning to happen. They didn't have a space. They didn't have even a clean counter to put their Chromebook that they got from school that they probably didn't have before, but they all got sent home with a Chromebook, and like, good luck.
Yeah.
And so I imagine that there were a lot of children who really struggled, and a lot of adults who couldn't find connection within their home, or they were living alone and couldn't find connection outside in their street, in their neighborhood, because they hadn't made those connections before. And so they couldn't flex in this new world, they didn't have the foundation to build on in a home. Their home had no foundation for supporting adaptability.
Yeah, I'm sure this is probably cliche, but as you're talking, I'm thinking of this as sort of the sweet spot, right? We're talking about how being too rigid is not good, but also we don't want this chaos where we're super flexing and we don't have a place for an activity. And so there's this Goldilocks zone of where there's a place for everything, and we have structure and rhythm, but we can also adapt and flex with that structure and rhythm.
Yes, I think that is absolutely it, and that we are not flexing and adapting alone, and that our house is not a constant, but rather constantly changing. And so within that Goldilocks zone, we may ebb and flow like throughout our time living in a particular house. That doesn't stay stable over time. And the best houses are homes that can ride the waves successfully and adapt and change and flex so that the humans can adapt and change and flex. And they have control over their physical environment to support them rather than to fight against them at every turn.
Yeah, no, I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I'm applying it a lot, obviously, to my own home. But I do want to challenge you a little bit, because I'm now of the age where I do have a home that I can change and flex and structure, but a lot of people don't have that possibility, right? So I rented for decades, and I couldn't even paint the walls, right? Everything was beige, and one of the first things I did when I moved into my house was I painted the walls. But I'm also thinking there was an article in the special issue which was about student housing, because I think of student housing as like the pinnacle of you're stuck with kind of what you got, right? They give you a box, and if you're lucky, a private bathroom, and so how does that affect how people interact with what they feel is their home space, and what can they do to help within those constraints?
Yes. And I think that dorm design is like a whole entire field in social ecology.
Oh, really?
And I feel like the dorms on our campus, the residence hall on our campus, have used some of that research in the design, especially the newest building that we have. And so here's the Goldilocks. Here's the best place to be is a room where you have your own space, however tiny it is, that you can make your own. And they put up cork boards around like a little strip so that you can actually hang things up. That's super important without ruining the walls. You can tack things up. You can change your bedspread. You can organize your little tiny space. And then you have a shared common space. So there are 4 little rooms, 1 common space. That's the best of both worlds. To quote Hannah Montana, who just celebrated her 20th anniversary. So that was on my brain right there.
This is a little expert of information you didn't think you were going to get.
But I feel like being able to go in your own private space and close the door and make it your own, like attached to that place, but also be forced to socialize with others, is great skill building about routines. What do I do? Like where do I study? Where do I study best? And it takes some students some time to figure out that studying while my roommate is watching, some TV show or streaming or whatever, that's probably not the best for me. That maybe that's a time I go to my individual space. But figuring that out is figuring out routines and the social ecology of living together with other humans that are not your family, that you already determined that. Also, every student, all 4 students sharing that common space, have come from a home that is completely different. Some of them lived in chaotic homes. Some of them lived in overly controlled homes, and some of them lived somewhere in between. And so you bring all of that baggage, all of that, ecosystem into a new ecosystem, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it causes friction, right? And they're
Right.
fighting all the time. And so I feel like it's a great experiment in how do we help people develop routines as an adult.
Right. Right. Well, you've heard it here from Georgina first that moving into a college dorm, by the sounds of it, is one of the hardest things you can do. As you suddenly,
That's a fact.
yeah, all right, there we go. But it's nice to know that some of the things that I did when I first moved out make sense. You pin things to the wall. You bring in your favorite plushies, so you make it yours, even in that very small way of making it yours somehow.
Yes. And you have to figure out like the social relationships of, when do you watch TV and when do I study? If you're sharing the space and you don't have an individual space to go to, you have to figure those routines out. That's a really important skill
Yeah.
because it involves like developing your self-regulation even more than when you were a child living in your house growing up, or your apartment, or your residence, wherever it was. You're bringing that and then developing it on your own as a newly minted adult.
I love it. A little encouragement there for all of our incoming freshmen next year. Well, thank you so much, Georgina, for giving me a little snippet of your whole world here in social ecology. I know I didn't give it anywhere near as much time or details I should have, and I'm sure
So
there are
fun.
plenty of talking points on this list here that I missed. But thank you so much for joining me. I really
Thanks for
appreciate
having me. It was so fun.
it. Yay. Psychology and Stuff is brought to you by Good Cause Productions at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. The executive producer is Ryan Martin, and our creative director is Jenny Young. The media engineer for this episode is Kennedy Punke. Special thanks to my guest today, Dr. Georjeanna Wilson-Doenges. If you haven't already, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. I'm your host, Alison Jane Martingano. Keep being amazing.